Welcome to Grow Money Business, the podcast dedicated to helping business owners grow both their wealth and business on their own terms. Here's your host, Grant Bledsoe.
Hello, everybody. Grant Bledsoe here. Welcome back to Grow Money Business. This week's episode is number 99. And this week on the podcast, we're continuing the theme of workplace benefits since we're in open enrollment window season across the country. Last week, we had a wonderful guest on, Danielle Roberts, to walk us through Medicare and the system and the ins and outs. Next week, we have another great guest coming on to talk about how to save money on small business health plans. This week, I want to talk about a specific feature offered in many workplace health plans, or benefits in general, that is, and that's flex spending accounts, FSAs, dependent care flex spending accounts, dependent care FSAs, and health savings accounts, HSAs. I think this is an often underutilized feature of a lot of company benefits options. And if we're going to try to squeeze every bit of value we can out of workplace benefits, it's something that we definitely need to consider. So I cover all three on this podcast, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey, everybody. Real quick before we jump into today's episode, I have been advised by my attorneys to remind you all that none of what you might hear in today or any other episode of Grow Money Business is financial, investing, tax, legal, fitness, or even relationship advice. It's content that you're free to use and deploy on your own terms. And before you take any actions on what we might cover in the show, I really encourage you to consult with your accountant, attorney, or financial planner. If you don't have a financial planner and think that you might need one, be sure to check out threeoakswealth.com to learn more about my firm's planning, advice, and investment services. So this week on the podcast, what I would like to cover is another topic that has to do with health benefits. We're kind of devoting this month, the month of October, to talk about Medicare, health benefits, obtaining medical coverage, and health plans for businesses. We have a guest coming on next week to talk about that. And this week, what I wanted to talk about is something that we've not covered on the podcast yet, and that's flex spending accounts, health savings accounts, dependent care flex spending accounts, and how to use those to maximize the benefits that you might have access to at work. And this could be relevant if you are a business owner and you sponsor plans that have these features. This could be relevant if you work somewhere or if your spouse works somewhere that has access to these features. But I wanted to devote this month to benefits, health plans, that kind of stuff, because a lot of us right now are going through open enrollment, or we will be soon, starting later this month, the month of October, and usually that goes into November. And of course, the reason for that is you're making elections for what your health benefits are going to be starting January 1st, and providers need a little bit of time to process your choices. So they open up these windows every year for you to make those changes and those choices, and then a few months later, they become effective starting in January. So usually when you work for a big employer, so I used to work at Charles Schwab, and they had all sorts of different choices for us in terms of health benefits to kind of pick and choose from. And one common feature here is, number one, you have your health, your medical benefits, your vision, your dental insurance that you can opt into or opt out of given the situation. Oftentimes the employer will not only offer the plan, but offer to pay a portion of the premiums and kind of subsidize the cost for employees, which is really, really nice. But on top of that, they have other options for you to save for your out-of-pocket medical costs. And that's really what I wanted to focus on today. And the first one that I want to cover is what's called an FSA. Part of the reason that I wanted to, that I wanted to cover this today is this is an area where all these acronyms are really tossed around. And I think a lot of people out there just kind of get them confused and mix them up. I know I do, because they all sound so similar. So an FSA is a flex spending account. And when you opt into benefits for the year, you might have access to an FSA. What that means is that if you opt into it, you and or your employer can put money into this plan for your out-of-pocket medical expenses for that year. And just like your 401k, just like premiums for your other health, dental, vision that might get deducted out of your paychecks through payroll, this is a way for you to defer a little bit of cash out of your paycheck and save it in this tax-advantaged flex spending account for the use of your medical costs for the year. And so it's a really convenient kind of feature. And it's great if your employer will put some money in there on your behalf, because you can use that throughout the year to pay your out-of-pocket costs. And that could be co-pays, that could be co-insurance before or any out-of-pocket stuff before or after you hit your deductible. There's a wide array of eligible expenses you can use those funds for. So there are a couple of things that we need to consider with regard to the FSA and how best to really optimize these things. Number one is that you don't want to put too much money in there, because these FSAs are only allowed to carry over a small amount of your balance into the subsequent year if you don't use all of it this year. So let's say that you really like this option and you want to save a whole bunch of money for your future health expenses, so you opt into the FSA at work. And because you want to save for your health expenses so aggressively, you put in a lot of money out of your paycheck into this account. And there's a federal annual limit, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but there's some threshold, just like your IRA and your 401k and other retirement savings vehicles, that you cannot surpass. But you want to go up to that limit because you want to be aggressive. Well, if it turns out that you put all that money into the account for tax year 22, so you make the election now, you put money into the account throughout 2022, reach that annual maximum, but then you don't have any out-of-pocket costs next year, well, guess what? Most of that money goes away. You can't carry it over into future years. There's a little bit that can be rolled over into future years, but the majority of it is, I believe, relinquished by your employer. So this is something where you don't want to put too much money in. And if you're really trying to optimize it, what you want to do is figure out and maybe forecast what you think your out-of-pocket costs are going to be. If you know you have some procedure coming up, maybe this would be a good way to put money into it and pay for that on a tax-deferred basis. Because if you pay for it with cash out of your bank account, that's money that you've already paid tax on. So if you know exactly what your expenses are going to look like, it would be nice to route the payments through an FSA because it's all done on a tax-advantaged basis. But you don't want to put too much in there if you can really help it. So it's challenging to forecast exactly what our out-of-pocket spending might be in upcoming years, but there are ways to do it in certain circumstances. If you know you have a procedure coming up, if you are pregnant maybe and you have maternity costs coming up, it's all health plans are pretty transparent these days about what your costs are going to be out of pocket for maternity and hospital stays and all the stuff that comes along with that. So if you have those certainties coming up, that's one thing you might want to consider. And the byproduct of the fact that these funds don't roll over from year to year, one of the things you see is, you can spend the funds on co-pays when you go into the doctor and co-insurance and all that, but you can also spend them at the pharmacy. And you can buy like over-the-counter medicine and Band-Aids and stuff like that. And so what we used to see kind of comically when I used to work at Schwab is that some people would overfund these FSAs, and then in late December, they'd be going into the pharmacy and like buying all the Band-Aids off the shelf because the money was going to disappear anyway, and they wanted to, stock their supply at home, I guess. So it's a really helpful feature, but we don't want to overuse it. The byproduct here, or distant cousin maybe, is what's called a dependent care FSA. This is an awesome feature. And again, there's an annual limit. I want to say it's $5,000 per person per year. Don't quote me on that. You'd have to look it up. But the idea here is that if you have kids that you're sending to daycare, you're paying those daycare costs out of pocket, a dependent care FSA is the exact same thing as an ordinary flex spending account for your medical costs for childcare. And so we have clients who send their kids to daycare, and that's really expensive. But they also have access to these dependent care flex spending accounts, which allows them to put some of those costs into the account on a tax-deferred basis. So think about it as up to that annual contribution limit, which again, I want to say is $5,000 per person per year. Think of that as tax-free childcare. Because if you're paying for that out of pocket with cash in the bank, or you're putting it on your credit card, or you're writing a check, that's all money that you've paid tax on because you've deposited those paychecks from various sources of income over the years, and you've paid income tax on that already. So if you route it through the dependent care FSA, it comes out tax-free, which is a really, really nifty way to handle it. Again, it doesn't carry over year to year, but that's less of an issue with the dependent care FSA, because if your kid's going to daycare now, the plan is, for most people, is to have them continue going to daycare. And if that's not the plan, then you're obviously not going to be as interested in the dependent care FSA in the first place. So suffice it to say that these are two really good options for paying for your child care, paying for your upcoming healthcare costs with tax-free money. And it takes a little bit of forethought and a little bit of planning, but now is the time of the year when you want to do that if you're making elections for next year. Now, like the traditional flex spending account for healthcare expenses, the dependent care FSA, some employers will put money into those accounts on your behalf, which is really a killer benefit. Somewhat few and far between I've seen. There are not that many employers that will help you out. Maybe some will match your contributions. But again, explore that option if it's available to you and your kids, and you're sending your kids to daycare. The follow-up I should probably add here is that before you dive into either of these options, you want to know how easy it is to change your elections mid-year, contribution-wise. So if you opt into the FSA and the dependent care FSA for 2022, what I think you would want to know before making that choice is, if we get into March and it turns out I don't need that procedure, or we're trying to get pregnant, but if it doesn't happen, is it possible for me to change the amount that I'm contributing to these accounts out of my paycheck? Some places will, I believe, only or restrict you from making those changes, except for maybe a couple windows throughout the year. So you want to know what the parameters are for your plan and what the options are prior to jumping in. Now, the third thing that I wanted to cover today is another related vehicle for saving for healthcare costs, and it's called a health savings account. So we have the flex spending account for medical expenses, tax-deferred dollars, goes away at the end of the year. You have the dependent care flex spending account. Same idea, but it's for childcare. This option is a little bit different. It's an HSA, health savings account. And if you've been listening to the podcast for any period of time, you know that I'm pretty fond of finding these nifty tax-advantaged ways to save for various things. If we have more money coming in each month than we're spending, or more money coming in each year than we're spending throughout the year, that adds to our wealth. And that's really what we're trying to do long term. But where do we park that extra cash? Does it sit in the bank? Is it invested for growth? Is it in a retirement account? Well, this is where we find all these different types of tax advantaged ways to park that cash, pay less in tax, and capture more aggressive compound growth, because the less you pay in tax, the faster that it grows. So as I survey all these different options, the HSA is probably my favorite vehicle across the entire tax code, to be totally honest. Not everybody is eligible for it. The reason that it's my favorite is, just like the FSA, you put money into this plan. It doesn't necessarily have to be through payroll. You can make deposits out of your bank account into an HSA if you wanted to. It doesn't necessarily have to be employee sponsored. You could do it on your own, provided that you're eligible for to make contributions to an HSA. But it's a really good deal. And the reason why is, any money that you put into the HSA, again, whether it's routed through your payroll deferrals or deposited directly into an account that you control, money that you go in is tax deductible. So you don't pay tax on money that you put in. Once your account reaches a certain threshold, and this is a provider by provider basis, but most providers these days, once you have like $1,000 or $3,000 in the account, you can invest the funds in the account across a menu of mutual funds. So this is a growing space. There are more providers. This is a kind of a rapidly evolving type of account. But once you get funds in there, you can invest it and it will start to grow over time. You're not required to spend the funds in that year. So unlike the FSA, anything that you put into an HSA, a health savings account, is not going to be washed away at the end of the year. It can continue to grow and compound on your behalf. And on top of that, when you take money out down the road for whatever medical costs, it comes out tax-free too. So if you think of your traditional IRA or a 401k that you might be contributing to at work, you put money in through your paychecks. You don't pay tax on it, income tax that is. You invest the funds, they grow. When you take money out, you pay income tax on every penny that comes out. And the reverse of that is a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k. You put money into the retirement plan, you pay tax on the way in, it grows tax-free, and you take it out later, it's tax-free then too. It's kind of one or the other. Do you want to pay tax now or later? The HSA, you don't pay tax at all if you structure it right. It's tax-free on the way in, the growth is tax-free, and it's tax-free on the way out if it's used for qualifying medical expenses. So it truly is the best deal in the tax code that I have come across for this reason for a lot of people. And on top of that, if let's say that you use one of these accounts and grow a balance, and it compounds and grows and grows and grows, and then you just never use the funds. Well, if you're in your 70s and you feel like you have a lot of HSA dollars and you don't need that much for healthcare costs, anything that you take out after age 59 and a half comes out free of penalty, and you pay income tax on the distributions. So it's kind of like having another IRA at your disposal, because the tax implications are exactly the same. But if you take the money out after age 59 and a half, or even before 59 and a half for that matter, if you take the money out for medical reasons, then it comes out totally tax-free. So it's an awesome, awesome tax deal. Now, I mentioned that not everybody is eligible to contribute to one of these things. And this was, I think this type of account was created with the Affordable Care Act. But we have this delineation in the health plan space between high deductible plans and everything else. And so if you recall, part of if you want to call it, spirit of the Affordable Care Act is they wanted to try to incentivize people to take care of themselves before having to go in and get medical care and rely on the system to take care of them, right? So it was more preventive care oriented. And if people are, if our public health improves, if people are generally more healthy as individuals, then they're not going to need to rely on the system and insurance as much, and it's going to help decrease our healthcare spending per capita across the country. And that was the intention. I don't know that it's been terribly successful, but that was the idea. And so as part of that, they said, well, if you choose one of these high deductible plans, you'll be eligible to contribute to an HSA. And what that means is that if you opt for a healthcare plan that has at least a certain deductible and a certain out-of-pocket maximum per year, and I can't remember what either of those numbers are off the top of my head. You see how prepared I am for these episodes. If you enroll in a plan that meets those criteria, then you qualify to make HSA contributions. And we're going to give you this great tax benefit long-term in exchange for one of these plans that incentivizes you to take care of yourself in the first place. And so the difference between the high deductible plan and anything else is that in exchange for the higher deductible, meaning when you have to go to the doctor, it's going to cost you a little bit more throughout the year because the deductible is higher. But the premiums are lower because of that feature. So what does that do compared to an ordinary plan with a lower deductible, larger monthly premiums for the plan? Well, it incentivizes people to take care of themselves and visit the doctor a little bit less frequently. And so if you do that, it's economically favorable for you to go with the high deductible plan. So that was the background there. If you're not in a high deductible plan and you have HSA balances, you don't need to get rid of them or anything. They can still remain in there. You're just not eligible to make any contributions in years in which you're enrolled in a non-high deductible plan. And so here's the strategy. If you're someone who really takes care of themselves, they're really healthy, and if the high deductible plan is a good choice for you, and to be clear, I wouldn't say that you ought to opt into a high deductible plan just for the purpose of contributing to an HSA. The high deductible plan has to fit your needs and profile in the first place. But if it does, then it makes a lot of sense because of the benefit of the HSA. If you need to see the doctor a lot throughout the year, then it may not make sense in the first place. So if you have balances in the plan, you don't have to get rid of them if you opt into the high deductible plan in 1 year and then revert back in later years. But the strategy here, as far as I can tell, is usually to make the most contributions you possibly can to the HSA, max out those contributions in years in which you're eligible, invest the funds you have in the plan for growth so the balances grow over time. But then when out-of-pocket costs come up throughout the year, try everything you can not to use the funds in the HSA. Just let them continue to grow because it's all tax-free deferred growth that will compound and continue to become more beneficial over time. So if you can afford to pay more out of pocket because you're in the higher deductible plan in the first place and fund the HSA simultaneously, that really is a pretty powerful way to structure it. Again, it's not a great fit for everybody, but if you're healthy and if the plan is a good fit in the first place, this HSA deal is really the best thing going. Now, I'm not quite an expert in this arena as much as I am in other investment and business-oriented areas, but I'm pretty familiar with it because a lot of our clients deal with it. And to my knowledge, I'm pretty confident you cannot have an FSA and an HSA simultaneously. But I do think you can have an HSA and a dependent care FSA because the dependent care FSA is used just for that unique or that specific expense. Again, it's possible I'm wrong on that, but I'm pretty confident you can have both. And again, some employers will, depending on which of these you choose, employers don't have to offer these, but if they do, depending on which of these types of plans you choose, may put money in on your behalf too. So if you work somewhere that offers a high deductible plan that you opt into, but they don't offer an HSA, you can go open one on your own. Your enrollment in the high deductible plan, provided you're not simultaneously covered by a non-high deductible plan, and the high deductible plan is your only coverage. If that's the case, you can go open an HSA on your own that has nothing to do with the workplace benefits. And like I mentioned a few minutes ago, this is an evolving space. The parameters for how much you have to have in the account before you can choose investments, it's growing fairly rapidly. Fidelity is growing their platform. There are a number of different providers, and I know if you Google it, you can find top 10 lists, littering the first page of your Google search. So there are providers out there, and just like 401ks and other types of retirement plans, if your employer is sponsoring the HSA and then you depart from employment, you can take the balances with you too, and then roll them into an account that you control. So it's really a pretty flexible system. And when you're evaluating providers, just like you evaluate a broker for your Roth IRA or something else, you're looking at costs, you're looking at interface, ease of use, and customer service. And then you also want to look at the menu of investments you have available to you for balances in that account, because that's going to be specific to the provider. They're not all going to be in the same. They're not all going to be the same. There's no, unilateral requirement for them to keep a specific type of investment in these things. So if you're evaluating HSA providers, that's how I would probably do it. Fidelity does a pretty good job with their brokerage accounts and everything else, so you might want to start there too. And I don't know if Vanguard has HSAs yet or not, but I would suspect that they probably will at some point if they don't already. So that might be a tree to bark up as well. Okay, that's basically what I had for this. Oh, there's one other thing I wanted to mention, because we're talking about these other benefits related to enrollment windows. We talked about flex spending account, dependent care, flex spending accounts, and health savings accounts. There's one other option that I'm really a fan of, unrelated to healthcare, but a part of a lot of benefits offerings, and that's a legal plan. MetLaw is one of the biggest providers in this space. And when you're going through checking off your benefit elections for the year, not everybody has an enrollment window in October and November, by the way. A lot of companies who have different fiscal year ends will be in June and July. But I want to say most enrollment windows are this time of year. As you're going through those elections, some companies will offer legal plans. And so for like $10 a pay period or $10 a month or whatever, you can opt into this thing. And if something comes up that requires you speaking with an attorney, the plan will cover it. If you get in a car wreck, you need to have an attorney draft a letter to, I don't know, tenant, landlord, whatever, just stuff comes up that where you might want to chat with an attorney, these plans come in really handy. And if you're paying $10 a month, that's $120 a year, which is like 12 minutes of a qualified attorney's time. So it's really a cost-effective way to have access to this kind of thing. And when we run into it, when we're going through the financial planning process with clients, when it comes time to do some estate planning, I feel like a lot of people are in the situation where they keep putting off doing their trust, doing their wills. They keep putting off amending this kind of thing because nobody likes to talk about their own disability, their own mortality. It's an easy can to kick down the road. And if it costs a couple $1,000s to get those documents in place and just take care of it, that's an easy excuse for not doing it. Well, if you're in that position and you have access to a legal plan, sign up for the stinking legal plan. Most all of them are going to cover your estate planning needs. That's what my wife and I did when we drew up our trust when I was had legal coverage through work when I was at Schwab. It's going to cost you a couple $1,000s out of pocket for a basic estate plan for most people anyway. Sign up for the legal plan and have them cover it, or at least cover a portion of it. And just like an HMO, they'll have a network of attorneys that you can use. And unless you have really specific or ornate needs, the basic stuff, this network of attorneys is probably going to be very qualified to handle. For specific business issues, this is probably not a good fit. You need to have, a business attorney that you have a relationship with that can help you on an ongoing basis. And if they may not be in that network of attorneys, but basic estate plans, this is a really cost-effective way to get it done. All right, that's what I had for this week. Like I say, with enrollment windows opening, we're going to devote this month to benefits, healthcare. We talked about Medicare. Daniel Roberts was a wonderful guest we had on last week. Next week, we have a great guest coming on to talk about medical benefits for small businesses and how to save money on them. And we may even cram one more in after that on the same topic. We will see. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you all again soon.
Thanks for tuning in to Grow Money Business, the podcast dedicated to helping business owners grow both their wealth and business on their own terms. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you digest podcasts to ensure you don't miss out on future episodes and announcements. And feel free to submit questions to growmoneybusiness.com.